And we're live.
Yay!
Hey, welcome everyone to another fun episode of React 30. I think this is our 6th episode. This is the podcast all about React and JavaScript, where we promise not to waste more than 30 minutes of your time. I'm your host, Michael Jackson. Joining us today is our co-hosts Kent C. Dodds and
Hello.
Ryan.
Hey, how's it going?
Ryan informed me that he just came in from the lake after performing a 360 on a wakeboard, so if he's a little bit, pumped or excited to be here, you'll understand exactly why. But our special guest today, and we're super stoked about him being here, is Jordan Walke. Say hi, Jordan.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, hey, thank you for being on the show, man. Jordan is actually... he's at Facebook. He's actually the first member of the React core team to be on our podcast, which is a pretty cool milestone, I think, for us. Jordan actually created React a few years ago, and so we're super excited to have him on the show today to talk about that. Jordan. Just kind of by way of intro, would you kind of let us know a little bit, let's go a little bit kind of pre-React. What was your background before kind of, thinking up React? It seems to me like you've got a lot of experience in like OCaml and, these kind of highly functional languages. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience before pre-React?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of all over the board. I would just say, as far as the story of how React was created, I did create the initial version of React, but as you know, it takes an entire community to like evolve React to where it is today, and a lot of it doesn't even look remotely close to what it was when I first made the first prototype.
Yeah, whatever. You made it. It's okay.
Yeah, I think the initial inventor gets a disproportionate amount of credit for a lot of stuff.
Absolutely.
But I can kind of explain what was going on in my head and in my background there. So before React, yeah, I've always been interested in functional programming and functional languages, and but on the job before that, I was doing more distributed systems stuff at Amazon, and at Facebook, I was working on user interfaces and I just was really bummed about the state of building UIs and keeping everything in sync, and just trying to manage the complexity of a complicated application where dollars are on the line. So I was on the ads team there at Facebook, and so I just kind of gradually began piecing together all these different ideas that were out there already, functional programming, some of the component models from existing frameworks, and some of the bindings frameworks that are out there for bidirectional bindings. And I kind of like took a step back and just looked at it from a bird's eye view and realized that we could simplify a lot of it if we were to just do the dumbest thing possible, which is to just re-render your component functions over and over again, and to punt the diffing to a different stage, kind of, I guess, make it a little bit more like Git in that sense. Yeah, so that's kind of that's kind of the story.
Cool. So you were working on distributed systems, you said, at Amazon. It's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I kind of tend to think about my components, my React components, as kind of these miniature little systems. Each one has its own state. I can talk between systems via these props that I'm passing around.
Yeah, we've used the term distributed UI in a lot of our conversations about React with each other and with people at our workshops and stuff. It's like,
oh, cool.
These components are like a distributed UI.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just interesting how like a lot of kind of the ideas of distributing state and distributed systems, a lot of the kind of ideas of behind service-oriented architecture, it kind of seems like they translate, or there are some good parallels, I guess, in a React application. Did that ever kind of cross your mind when you were or did that experience kind of influence the way that you were thinking about the React component model?
I think it might have, yeah, maybe subconsciously. I'd just been thinking like that for so long that it was probably natural to make a component model that resembled it. But more so, I think just wanting to bring engineering fundamentals to user interface development. Before, it was really hard to express constraints on your UI and say, this is what I'm biting off, this is what I commit to. I commit to having an API that accepts these pieces of information, and it will render down to something, and I'm not going to expose all the implementation details. That's some very basic engineering principles there that seem to be lost on much of UI development before React and before Ember and a lot of these other frameworks too. React doesn't get all the credit for that, but it was definitely what motivated me, because the majority of developers at the time, and probably even today, are just crawling the DOM, looking for something that they suspect is going to be in the right place, without that being, I guess, committed to anywhere on an API level. So that was part of what drove the desire to get the React component model in place.
Interesting. So
I remember I was at a jQuery conference 5 years ago or something. I can't remember how long ago it was, but there was a talk about jQuery UI where they just kept saying the phrase, find something, do something. That's how you use jQuery. Find something, do something. And it's funny that at the time that seemed amazing. It was like, whoa, this is so awesome. And now we look back at that like, oh, crap.
It doesn't work well when you have many other developers that are finding something and doing something with the stuff you didn't intend them on. You didn't intend that they would ever find it, let alone do anything with it. But
yeah,
when I
dependency there,
myself, like I'm hacking together a web page, like a README doc or something, I don't mind using jQuery because I'm the only one. I'm the only one contributing to that project. So, yeah.
Makes sense.
yeah, the dependencies there with jQuery are so implicit, and one of the nice things about React is it makes everything componentized and explicit. One thing that I wanted to I like as part of the backstory is like, what was the motivation for creating React? Was it just like you saw other frameworks and you're like, I want to make a framework, or were you actually trying to solve a problem at Facebook?
Well, I was sort of a framework connoisseur, and I guess that started this. And I would try out all these frameworks, and there's a lot to appreciate about all of them. And many of them had a really good story for the initial UI rendering and the initial app load. And some of them had decent solutions for the story around updates, but they just always seemed so redundant. So like you would render something and then you would set up all these other bindings to make sure it keeps in sync with the data that changes. And so we had something like that in Facebook ads create flow, which I was working on at the time. And we had these bidirectional bindings, and it was really tough to keep things in sync, and bidirectional bindings really started to appear to be this kind of false promise. They promise to reduce the complexity, but there's all this hidden complexity when things aren't really bidirectional, or they shouldn't be, and you really can't anticipate where all these changes are going to propagate through the entire system. You think like, oh, it's just a point-to-point binding. Well, before you know it, you're going to start needing to set up other point-to-point bindings based on one end of that point-to-point binding, and that trickles throughout your entire app. And the promise of having this really fast, direct, value key value pair, it kind of fell through. I found in practice on very large apps like the Create Flow. So, the Create Flow in Facebook was where a lot of the motivation came from, because it's a really complicated app with a lot of data that changes, and a lot of the UI has to be reflective of these data changes.
That initial thing that you had at React that you switched over to, would you say it was more like Backbone, or was it more like just sort of jQuery throwing stuff at things, or was it more like Ember? Can you draw any comparisons there? What you were working with before?
Yeah, I think it was decent, and it's probably more like Ember, and I think it got a lot of things right, and I think it did have this good encapsulation. You could hide implementation details. It wasn't just like jQuery Town. But a lot of the stuff at Facebook before that was kind of like jQuery.
So you kind of had like a template that bindings would kind of happen automatically for you.
Yeah, there was no templates, but it was definitely there were some facilities to help wire up some bindings. And again, after I had done that, I realized there's just a lot of hidden complexity in that, and it's not as easy as you would think to anticipate and predict where these changes are going to propagate into your system. So I took a step back and realized we were writing these bindings inline where you'd say here's a value, and it's going to tie to this other data model maybe, and when this data model's field changes, I'm going to supply a function, and that function is going to operate on that value, the new change value, to determine the input, like the prop or something. And so you were kind of writing these functions in line that would map, they'd map a changed value to an output value.
And you're like, why not do this for the whole thing?
Yeah, if you just evaporated these functions and just re-executed the larger block, put the granularity of change at the component boundary itself, then you get to use all the primitives of the language, like arrays, array.map, objects, instead of having to create these abstractions that are getting in the way. So the language is sufficient to express values changing over time because functions are.
That was the real trick for me to kind of understand how UI could be functional. I was getting a little bit interested in Clojure right before I saw React, and there was a guy on my team that was really into Clojure, and I was like, you know what? I think I'm sold on functional programming, but like, show me a tabs interface in ClojureScript. I want to see what that looks like. You click on these tabs and it changes the content down here. What does that look like? And what do the events look like in functional programming? And we could never quite figure out what the heck that even meant until React shows up and it's like, oh,
yeah,
this is what it looks like.
React is mostly functional, but it does kind of have a couple of escape hatches where we're not quite sure how to model something like a global focus. We suspect there's a way, but it's not exactly the most functional of paradigms. And so, yeah, we have some escape hatches to do this imperative stuff and manage imperative stuff like focus events and inputs that have a global focus. Some things are just inherently global. They're not really easy to encapsulate. So, but React does get us I think it gets us a huge step of the way there.
Those escape hatches are why it's, I think, proliferated so much.
Yeah.
I've used stuff that didn't have escape hatches as good as React's, and you're just wondering why you're using the tool in the first place. Michael, you had something a minute ago.
Well, no, I don't want to take the conversation in a completely different direction. I want to go with the flow here. I actually had a question about those escape hatches that we're talking about now. Where we can do some imperative stuff. In fact, Ryan and we conduct these training workshops, and we sometimes, we discuss sort of, this declarative model versus the imperative model that you're used to. If you're coming from, some kind of a jQuery-esque background, and we do a lot of, like the web audio API, for example. I mean, these are all imperative APIs. When did you kind of first start to develop? To me, one of the greatest things is the life cycle, right? The React life cycle. We've got component will mount, component did mount. Okay, now I'm going to get new props. Now I've updated. Now I'm going to unmount. In my mind, those are kind of the 5 core kind of events that really let us do anything that we want. When did that sort of start to come together in your mind? Specifically the life cycle.
Well, we from the start we had a couple of those implemented, and they were a little more functional, a little less escape hatchy, and we just from out in the battlefield of actually trying to integrate React, we realized we needed a little bit more. And Lee Byron was really helpful in crafting that API, making sure it was easy to learn and intuitive, and the naming was consistent, and making sure that we had all the right pieces that we would need in place. So Lee Byron helped us. He was a huge help in implementing that and the implementation of a lot of them.
At what point did Tom Okino come along and say, we need to call it render and not, what did it used to be called? Get component descriptor or something like that?
No, I don't remember.
And how did you feel about that?
But I'm guessing it was within 1 second of him looking at the framework.
So I worked with Thomas Alott, who works there at Facebook now, and you see his name on some of the commits a little bit before he was at Facebook, and he and I were talking about like UIs and stuff. You know, we'd both sort of grown out of Moo tools, but there wasn't a whole lot out there yet. We had Backbone and Sprout Core, I think, and we were just kind of discussing UIs, and we both had some experience with Rails, and you know, Rails has an action or has a controller, and then the controller has like 6 actions, right? All of them have an edit, a create, a delete. You know, it has those core actions that every model is going to have. And I remember Thomas saying something like, "What do you think those things are for an element on the page or a user interface?" He's like, "I think if we could figure out what those things are, like from Rails, but for a UI, yeah, I think we'd hit on something really awesome." And the two of us, I remember, spent a few minutes like just trying to write down what they were, and we didn't even come close to what React has today. But when I got my hands on React, I was like, "Whoa, they figured it out. These are the things." You know, we mounted, we updated. We're gonna get some new props. We're going to update. You know, it's I love the life cycle. Absolutely love it.
Awesome. I'm glad they're working out for you.
So you're sitting there at Facebook, you're working on the ads team, you're like, I feel like we could be doing this in a slightly better way. That's a big ship, right? That's a big ship that's already sailing, and how do you, I mean, we've been kind of diving into the tech, but there's also like this, you know, this business level conversation that needs to be had, right? Do we, you know, can we start to switch to something new? Can we start to migrate our stack to use some new technology? One of the cool things about working at a company like Facebook or Google or Apple is, you know, these kind of high-tech companies, is you get the opportunity to actually invent new technology. You don't just have to consume what others do. But at some point, there's a risk involved with that, right? There's a risk to the business that, you know, if this investment that we make, if it doesn't work out, well, we're going to be in another rewrite in you know, a few months or a few months time. So how did you, I guess, how did you kind of get the you know, the time that you needed to like work on this and figure it out, and then actually like convince, you know, some people at Facebook, namely your team or the people on the ads team, to actually give it a shot? Was that difficult, or was that pretty easy for you?
I mean, it's always difficult, and you're right that well, I believe the majority of it is social work. You know, it's socializing an idea and getting it sold,
yes, absolutely.
And it takes a lot of people to make that happen. That's the hardest part, and that's why you need to surround yourself with people that are supportive and willing to take a risk. And I'm incredibly grateful for all the people internally and externally outside of Facebook that took a risk on React. They were in on it with us, and they're why it is successful. Because if nobody did that, it would just be kind of a cool idea, a cool toy that never went anywhere. So yeah, it takes people that are willing to take a risk, and Facebook does have hackathons. It has a culture of, you know, trying new things, and even if it's not part of your day job, even if it's not on the roadmap, you know. So yeah, the culture at Facebook, I think, was conducive to that. And that's not to say it was easy, but it was possible, you know. So I'm appreciative of that environment there. It was really helpful. and it did take a lot of hard work on nights and weekends too.
Absolutely. Last time I was talking to Tom, he said he said he was talking to some I guess it was engineering managers or people at another company, and he said he wanted to talk about some things that they were working on, and all these other people wanted to talk about was React, because React has been making such deep inroads. So it's like as soon as a few people do have that faith and try the experiment and you can see good results, then it's like it just kind of snowballs from there, right? But when an idea is new, it's very fragile, and it's really cool that Facebook has that kind of culture where, you know, somebody can plant a seed like that and it can actually, you know, some people can buy into the experiment and it can actually grow and succeed.
Yeah.
Not only was it new, but it was also like very different from anything else that was out there at the time. Like everything was all about templates, and like there was this arbitrary line between your view template and your logic in JavaScript, your controller, whatever. But React kind of, you know, the whole mantra of like rethinking best practices and whatever. I imagine that it was like maybe a little bit challenging to you, even if people saw the good results. That like I could see them saying like, this looks like the results are good, but the like actual implementation in the code I'm writing, isn't this like an anti-pattern of some kind? Like I feel like it would be a little bit, you know, it's been hard enough to convince a lot of the community, at least it was, that this was a good idea. Was it challenging for you to convince people at Facebook that like this, you know, big detour away from what like common practices were at the time? Was that challenging to do that?
Yeah, not just externally but internally too, because it was a different paradigm, and you know, I had all these doubts. Like, I didn't think React would be as big as it is now. No way, because it is kind of niche. It's kind of functional programming, and that's not yet popular, you know. And so I thought that would be a big barrier to adoption, and so the initial conversations were very much, you know, having to sell functional programming first, because most people hadn't been sold on that yet.
I think David Nolan came in and sold everybody on it with Ohm.
Yeah.
When he first started showing that undo redo stuff, and everyone was like, "Whoa!" Yeah. Hey.
I think the timing for React was nice, although yeah, it was challenging because, you know, functional programming hadn't quite been sold yet and generally accepted, but it was definitely on the upswing, and so the timing was right. You know, that's why these things, I think, get really big and they blow up like this, because a lot of little things align just to make it happen.
Yep.
Yeah.
So tell me, do you have a kind of a favorite piece of React? Something where you look at it and you're like, yeah, I'm really proud of that piece of it.
No.
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 Okay. Next question.
All right, I got a question.
Was there anything that I'll let you go next, Ryan. Was there anything that, so I looked at some of the original code that you had written that later became React, and it seemed like you had some stuff in there for doing stuff like you know, CSS and styling and you know, I mean, I imagine you probably had a lot of different ideas when you were first getting started with this. Is there anything that you had in kind of your initial implementation, your initial you know, spikes that didn't make it into what we know as React today?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you asked. And it's relevant to the lifecycle stuff we were talking about. I do wish that there was a way to unify the lifecycle, all those lifecycle hooks, and a more functional API. So I think that those are really important, but I wish they were more, a little more functional and provided a way to conveniently update the state as a result of those lifecycles being invoked. So I wish that we had a unification of a functional API plus the ability to do those escape hatch imperative calls. Yeah.
I was talking with Sebastian a while ago, and he was talking about we were talking about the create class API, and now that React is using ES6 classes, and he was just kind of like, like what if these functions, we don't need to create an object. Like, what if these functions are just exported from a module? I mean, a module, I guess, a JavaScript module is already technically an object, and then every function, every lifecycle function receives all of the arguments that it needs to operate on things, right? So, for example, in your component did mount, you might get, in addition to, you might get props, and you might get a set state argument in case you needed to call that as an argument to the function, so that there essentially wouldn't be a this. There would just be functions operating on values, operating on arguments. Is that kind of what you're thinking, or are you thinking of something else?
Yeah, I'm thinking of something like that. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool. Ryan, did you have a question?
Yeah. So I don't know if I'm the only programmer who does this, but there are times where I'm working on something, and then all of a sudden, like, something works that I've been working on, and like I get that sort of like rush of endorphins, like, this is going to work. Like, this API is going to work. Did you have something like that in React, and can you tell us about it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I remembered re-implementing the event bubbling, and
where were you? Were you at your office? Were you? Was it 3 in the morning eating burritos?
I was at my apartment, and I remembered re-implementing event bubbling, and I got the first click working, and it was entirely in framework space. It wasn't in the DOM, and I remember just having that rush of endorphins and thinking, whoa, this could actually work. And that was with like server rendering, so it was all server rendered in that first prototype, and everything was wired up on the client, and I had never seen that done anywhere. So.
So you just laid the events over the top of the existing HTML that you had rendered with.
Right.
React. Awesome.
Yeah, and then I realized, oh, this could actually work. Yeah, it was amazing.
That's awesome. Did you stick your hands up in the air?
I probably did. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I do. I'm like, yes.
So we technically have about 2.5 minutes left, but I don't think that anybody would argue with the fact that we're not going to waste any time, or we haven't wasted any time, so we could probably go a little bit over and still keep our promise.
And do we want to give Jordan a chance to just say whatever he might want to say here?
Let's do.
Put me on the spot.
Yeah.
I'm happy
you don't want
to other question.
I got plenty more questions for you.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk about? I know we wanted to touch briefly on reason, because like your big thing right now is not as much React as it is reason, if I understand correctly. So can you talk about why you're so excited about reason, or what reason even is?
Yes. So reason, the TLDR is that reason is a better front end for the OCaml compiler toolchain, and front end doesn't mean like type checker and creating the intermediate representations. What it means is a better developer experience inside of your editor, inside of project scaffolding, stuff like that. And I'm really excited about it because it's a way that it opens up a totally different programming tool to many more developers, specifically people that are web developers or React developers. And I'm really excited about it because the underlying compiler, OCaml, and just really ML in general is wonderful. It's amazing, and it's been around for almost 30 years, depending on which compiler you're talking about. And just to think that something this cool, this amazing, has been here for this long, kind of right under our noses, it's really exciting to kind of play archaeologist and like figure out like what's going on, why are we using the tools that we currently use today? Why aren't we using this other one? And what could we do to change that? And what would the benefits be? And for me, what really sells it for me is that it's a language that I can learn, and it greatly increases the scope of engineering tasks that I can solve. Because if I learn reason, and in the process I'm learning ML and OCaml, I'm not just a web developer. I'm not just a JS developer. The programs that I write can run without a virtual machine. They can run without Node. They can run without V8. They can run as much closer to the metal, compiled into assembly directly. There's no virtual machine. My instructions aren't going through an interpreter, and I don't have to sit there and pray that the JIT optimizes it. I can look at the assembly and just know and have a good sense of what's going to happen. So I get to program like that if I learn Reason. That's why I'm excited about it. But what's also cool is that I get to do everything I could do previously as a JS developer. So I can compile my program into JavaScript, fairly idiomatic JavaScript, and this ecosystem is only getting better because we have JS of OCaml, which is great, but we also have BuckleScript, which is kind of the up and coming JS compiler, which works with Reason as well. So it's not like I'm giving up a previous way of developing and a previous set of problems I could solve. I'm only gaining more. That's why I'm excited about it.
I love. Let me just tell you, I loved when I saw that Reason kind of pitches itself as an entire tool chain, right? And not just, hey, we're a new programming language. I love that you guys have the foresight to do things like, yeah, the editor is the interface that the developer is using. How can we make that better? How can we make, things like auto formatting of source code and stuff like that? How can we get rid of like all those little kind of annoying things that developers have to do and really improve that experience? I think that's, because we've got programming languages. I think the piece that you're talking about now, being able to compile, bypassing JITs and bypassing interpreters entirely, I think that's totally awesome. But it's also awesome that you guys are pitching yourselves as like, hey, look, it's not just a new language; it's a new way of thinking about writing code. So kudos for that. That's awesome. Okay, so I think we are probably out of time here on React 30. What do you say, Kent? Are we out of time?
Yeah, we're a little bit over, but we definitely didn't waste anybody's time, that's for sure.
All right, so Jordan, just wanted to say thank you so much for being our guest today on the show. I want to have you on again after I get a chance to dive into Reason, because I want to talk about that a lot more. I think that's a lot more significant than anybody is really mentioning right now. But thank you all so much for all the work that you've done. You've changed my career, and you and everybody else at Facebook who's worked on React definitely changed my career for the better, and I just can't say thank you enough. So thanks for coming on the show today, man.
Well, thank you.
All right. See y'all later.
See you.
Bye-bye.